Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. On behalf of the Environmental Finance Center Network, welcome to our online training today on workforce planning and water system collaboration. My name is Tess Clark. I'm joining you from the Syracuse University Environmental Finance Center. And before we get started, there are a few logistics that I want everyone to keep in mind for today's training. First, everyone will be on mute just to control audio quality. If you have a question, just type it at any time into the GoToWebinar question dialog box. We will be reserving all the questions for the end, so our presenters will be waiting to answer those questions. We do encourage you to submit them at any time, though. We will be sending out some follow-up materials after the webinar. You will receive an email that includes a link to our survey, as well as a link to the recording of today's presentation. This training is not pre-approved for any type of credit. However, we can provide registered attendees with a certificate for participating in the training. And now we're going to move on to a little bit about the Environmental Finance Center Network. Our program provides training and technical assistance to small public water systems in all U.S. states and territories to help local water systems achieve their goals and stay in compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act. And here you can see all of the members of our Small Systems Program team. So today, for example, you'll be hearing from our colleagues at the Environmental Finance Center at the University of North Carolina. Our centers work together to create solutions to difficult how-to-pay issues of environmental protection and improvement. And here are a couple areas of expertise that we will typically present on. And on that note, I'd like to introduce our first speaker for today. We have Erin Riggs. Erin is the director of the University of North Carolina EFC, and she will take it from here.
Thank you, Tess. Good morning, everybody. I hope that you're having a good morning and getting some spring weather starting in Minnesota. We're having a crazy thunderstorm today in North Carolina, but hoping for sunshine soon. I'm happy to be here this morning and talking a little bit about regional cooperation and collaboration and sort of the power of partnerships in working together. I am, as Tess indicated, I'm the director of the Environmental Finance Center. My colleague Stephen Labb will be presenting a little bit later, and I'll let him introduce himself then. Yeah, if you have any questions about the content today, we don't have time to cover it, feel free to reach out to us. Our contacts are in the presentation. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. So today I'm going to be talking about regional collaboration. So why would we consider regionalization as water or wastewater systems in the state? One of the biggest reasons is dealing with infrastructure challenges, of which I know are a big challenge in both Minnesota and North Carolina, as well as the rest of the country. We're dealing with really high costs and needs going forward from replacing those pipes. And so we have to consider ways that we can cover those costs without having significant rate increases. So regionalization might provide a solution for that. Additionally, there's lots of growth in different areas. Capacity challenges can go both ways. We can look at regionalization as a solution for an increase in needs in growing areas for capacity, as well as a declining population solution in which we're having excess capacity and we want to partner to share that where we don't have enough customers in our own base. Emergency needs, this comes up and you all probably deal with this relatively regularly over the course of a year, thinking about the times when you have a pipe burst or other sort of challenges and something that might, a contamination issue or things like that, personnel needs. We can think about how we can partner in a region and work together to provide, to share those resources in those emergencies. You definitely can generate economies of scale. It just makes sense if we're trying to cover the cost of a new pipe and we're sharing it among 10 customers versus sharing among 500 customers. The costs are going to be obviously a lot lower for the 500 customers than for the 10. So making those economies of scale are really helpful. And then we also have these new kind of climate challenges where we're dealing with kind of changing situations. And so with drought, in North Carolina, we're facing lots of extreme storms that are hitting our East Coast in particular. and so we have contamination issues or damage to our infrastructure. So regionalization can help with that as well and making us more resilient. Next slide. Some of the options for regionalization that I'm just going to go through a little bit. One way is to think about partnering with other governmental units in this interlocal cooperation and thinking about how we can provide services to each other. And remembering that we're not only talking about full-on service provision, you can regionalize in a lot of ways. Shared communication, you can share resources, you could share a street sweeper or other sorts of basic needs that are related to things other than just connecting our pipes. Emergency connections, as we mentioned, we'll talk about those sorts of regionalization opportunities. And then full-on consolidation is something that we can also think about and talk about going forward. Next slide. Interlocal cooperation. We're going to talk about 3 different types briefly. So City A can go ahead and take on an undertaking for City B. City A could go ahead and provide water to City B, and City B can pay City A for that water. In this situation, in this relationship, we're both retaining our legal authorities, and one unit is just performing the undertaking for the other for payment, and that's just done contractually through these interlocal agreements. Next slide. We can decide together. Me and my neighboring city can decide we both need some support, perhaps for some sort of drinking water provision in our communities. And so we can take something on together. Again, we're retaining our independent legal authorities, but we're going to work together, and we're doing that contractually again. Next slide. In the third situation, we are going to go ahead and actually sort of delegate our legal authorities to a joint agency. And so in that situation, we're agreeing, we're coming up with what we need and what's going to work, but we're going ahead and giving our legal authority to this other agency to perform an undertaking. So this is the joint agency example. Next slide. In Minnesota, I looked at your statutes, and so these sorts of interlocal cooperation fall under your Joint Powers Act. So you probably are aware of this because water, wastewater, and water sector needs in general are obviously not the only ways that governments partner. But as far as this applies for drinking water, governmental units can jointly or collaboratively exercise any power common to the contracting parties. So this is thinking about, for all of the situations I just described, we're talking about things we can already do individually as governments, providing water utility service to our customers and any of the associated efforts that go with that. If I have the power to do that on my own, and that's common to you as my neighbor city that I want to partner with, then we can do something together through this Joint Powers Act. Again, it's not a way to come up with something that you otherwise can't do on your own. It has to be something that you internally could already do as separate units. You can go to the next slide, Stephen. So who can enter into this? Again, any governmental unit. And from the statutes, it includes cities, counties, towns, school districts, service cooperatives, federally recognized tribes, and any instrumentality of a governmental unit or any other political subdivision of Minnesota or another state. So you can go across borders if you're a system that's located on the kind of outer part of Minnesota on the border. Additionally, I didn't include it on the text, but you can partner directly with the University of Minnesota. So the university is included. So these are the types of partners that are out there for you to think about regionalizing with through these sorts of agreements. Next slide. When you're going ahead and drafting your agreement and you come up with providing service or supporting each other in a regionalized way, your agreement has to contain these basic items. I have worked on reviewing a lot of agreements in the state of North Carolina and have found that many of the contracts don't actually include what's required by statute. So it's, the lawyer in me would recommend going directly to the statute if you're thinking of creating new agreements going forward, and at least starting with the basics of what needs to be in there. So you want to think about the purpose, the power, the method of how you're going to accomplish it. If there's a cost sharing part of it, the method for dispersing funds, and you have to have a strict accountability of those funds and reporting. And then if there's liability, address that. And then also if there is property that's going to be transferred in some way or shared, then thinking about how it'll be distributed if the contract is terminated. So those are the basic provisions that need to be in these agreements when you're partnering on these. And again, these apply beyond water, wastewater sort of shared agreements. This is for all interlocal cooperation between the governments. Next slide. The other part of your statutes, they allow for this creation of these joint boards. So you are allowed to establish a joint board for issuing bonds or other obligations. You don't have to do so. It has to be made up of members from the governmental units that are involved in the agreement. And they have power to issue obligations, leverage indebtedness, and use those proceeds to carry out goals of the board. However, to note, they cannot pledge full faith and credit or taxing power of any of the units that are involved. So it has a role in helping with financing your endeavor, if you're sharing water services or things like that, but they cannot pledge that full faith and credit. Next slide. So that's one way to think about partnering or regionalizing. A second thing that we would talk about would be emergency connections, again, which is probably something you all have a benefit of using right now. There's three types of ways of thinking about emergency connections. The first is mutual response agreements with any of your local systems that are neighboring. A second is through these WARN networks that EPA has created. And the third is through statewide mutual aid. So the first, moving into the first, next slide. These emergency connections, this is a kind of going back up to what we were just talking about, but these are specifically related to emergency needs. But you can enter into agreement with your nearby cities or utilities to establish an emergency response partnership. This is going to be done just through an interlocal contract, and you can go ahead and include in your contract, these are some suggested things to include: the parties, the responsibilities of each party, how the emergency response will occur, and any financial responsibilities. So in North Carolina, we work with a lot of utilities, and they already have a lot of these emergency connections in place. If it's something you haven't already thought about and you don't have in place, or you haven't formalized it through an agreement, through a contract, it's something to think about going forward in the event that your emergency needs increase with sort of any failing infrastructure challenges or storm impacts, just to be able to know that you have some backup to keep your system with continuity going forward for your customers. Next slide. The second emergency connection sort of opportunity is through WARN, as I mentioned, the Water Wastewater Agency Response Networks. So this is just, if you're not already a part of it, a statewide group that you can be a part of. This is a situation in which the more people that join, the better the response opportunities are. It's basically pooling finances, supplies, equipment, and personnel, so that when there's an emergency, System A can reach out to this network and say, I really need this, and there's more people involved who can provide resources. There's no obligation to send resources if a member decides not to, and there are sample legal agreements for how this works that EPA has provided, but they can be tailored to this by system. Minnesota's WARN is administered through a statewide committee made up of 9 voting members. So if you want more information on that, I would recommend following up directly on the Minnesota WARN program if you're not already involved with that. Next slide. So a third opportunity for emergency aid at the state level is going to be coming directly, like at a state level, and then provided and distributed throughout the state. So this is thinking of one such example would be through FEMA in response to when there's an emergency declaration and an event that triggers FEMA funding. The state is going to be able to provide this sort of emergency aid to systems throughout. Additionally, I assume that some of you have been provided with relief for your customers coming from the COVID relief bills that have come out, and there's additional funding coming from the consolidated allocation bill that'll be directly going more toward utilities. So this type of relief will come through the state and have to be distributed at the state level to help support you. That relief that's coming is going to be focused on giving you resources to provide customer assistance right now and relief for financial needs related to some of the impacts of COVID. So this is just kind of thinking about, we can partner directly with our neighbor or other neighbors, we can partner as a group in the state, or we can directly receive resources from the state, and finding out what the ways of getting those resources are and how we can make sure we get access to them. Next slide. So the other type of regionalization that I wanted to briefly discuss is actual consolidation. This is consolidation sometimes is a term that people don't like to talk about. It can kind of be associated with more negative connotations of takeovers and things like that. But it's actually a really helpful tool for systems to regionalize and think about identifying needs and benefits going forward, some of the things that we discussed earlier. So there's 4 types of consolidation that I would identify for our discussion today. The first would be more of what you think of with consolidation, which is a direct acquisition. So you have a higher capacity utility that absorbs another utility in its entirety. And in that situation, once they have consolidated, then that second lower capacity utility ceases to exist. So there is only one utility that is remaining from that merger. The second form is a joint merger. So this is when you have 2 or more utilities of similar capacity deciding to consolidate to become a new entity. So they both kind of cease to exist, and they become a new entity altogether. And so in that situation, sometimes they're of more equal, but it makes sense. A good example of a joint merger was in Arkansas. Central Arkansas Water is a large utility that was the merger of 2 systems that were basically at equal capacity, and formed a bigger utility. So it's a great example of a joint merger. Balanced merger is kind of a hybrid of the other 2. This can be 2 or more utilities consolidating and creating a new governance structure. So there's going to be participation. So maybe there's 5 of us, we're consolidating together. There's one main utility that's essentially going to be the lead and taking on a lot of the assets, but there's a new board structure in which everyone that was previously taking care of their own utilities has representation and a voice in what we do going forward as a utility. This can be appealing when a lot of the challenges related to consolidation have to do often with the loss of that voice or that autonomy for the systems and the fear of that loss. So this is something that can help with that. And then the fourth consolidation kind of model is not really connecting pipes and pumps. It's actually thinking about consolidating our governance, our operations, and our management. So there's lots of opportunities to think, again, about regionalization and consolidation in terms of less about the engineering and more about the governance and the operations pieces, where you could also benefit. Next slide. One of the things that we've done at the UNC School of Government is we've worked on identifying different considerations when you're thinking about moving forward with something like a consolidation. We've also done this with what you would think about in an interlocal agreement. And so these are really important considerations to think about, especially because it can be a long and challenging road to get to something like a formal consolidation. So in thinking about it, these are some examples of the categories of resources we provide and discuss, and I'm happy to follow up if anyone is interested or considering consolidation and wants some more information on this. Kind of thinking about what your options are is an important forefront role, and then valuing how you're going to value those physical assets. There's lots of different tools out there to think about how to value assets for purposes of a consolidation. There's going to be outstanding obligations and responsibilities, thinking about the debt that you might have on your current system if you're moving forward in a consolidation. How is that going to be addressed through the contract? What sort of payment mechanism could you utilize? What are your customer rates going to look like? And this is, again, often a huge piece of the decision-making part. Is I don't want to go through this consolidation and have my customers have higher rates, but also understanding the process completely and being able to have open communication as you're going through it is really important. The governance structure, like I said, there's some structures that are really well done where you might have board representation, so you know that rate setting going forward, your system is going to have a voice, whether you're the acquiring utility or the system being acquired or the merging utilities. Something to think about what that governance structure will look like. If there is a board that's created, what does board representation look like and how could it change? Depending on the size of the system, is it based on what you're contributing and the assets? What does that look like? And then also it's really critical to think of at the forefront of any of these really involved partnerships that in many cases are forever. If I go ahead and sell my system to a neighboring system, how are we going to resolve disputes? What is that going to look like? And how can we do it in a way that is minimizing legal costs for our systems, which is also something that is in the best interest of everyone involved. So this is just sort of a guidebook on things that you should be thinking about and things that you should be talking about and deciding on before you go forward with this sort of formal consolidation and any of the accompanying contracts. Next slide. So I think I've already spoken to some of this, but why regional approaches should be considered. Next slide. There's a lot of benefits of regionalization. And again, this can go everywhere from I share an operator with my neighboring system to I have sold my system to my neighboring system and we are now one. You get economies of scale and efficiencies, economic development, which is incredibly important in communities that may be struggling in this area. Good water supply and wastewater supply is critical to that. And we have lots of case study examples of areas in the country where without that adequate water or wastewater supply, industry just wouldn't come. And so by improving that, regionalizing, there's a lot more opportunity for growth in the region. Access to capital, bond ratings and things like that are really great, and they allow for more access to different capital sources that you may not have if you're a small system without a bond rating. Better water quality by far is a great benefit of regionalization if that's something that you're struggling with. We have lots of case studies of contamination being the driver for regionalizing or consolidating. Increased capacity likewise is important. Higher operating efficiencies. There's a great potential for lower rates, and sometimes the lower rates, what it really looks like is if we stand alone, what are our rates going to do for the next 10 years versus if we consolidated, what will our rates look like? So the immediacy of the change might not be as noteworthy as recognizing that to stand alone, the rates are going to have to necessarily increase in a way that will make it unaffordable. So thinking about it like that is important. And then revenue stability is always important for systems, as well as that reduced exposure to regulatory penalties. So we see a lot of benefits of regionalization, and we have a lot of resources that are happy to follow up on that. But I think at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Becky from the state, who will be speaking about some of the funding programs available. Thank you.
Good morning. This is Becky Saby, and I'm with the Minnesota Public Facilities Authority, and I serve as the program coordinator for the agency. And this part of the webinar is just like the sample day at the grocery store. If you remember those days when we used to go to the grocery store and get little samples of pizza that always taste better at the store than when we brought them home, or the weather teaser on the evening news, except the topic is water infrastructure funding. And it's really just a brief summary of what our agency is and what we do. I want to thank the Environmental Finance Center for the opportunity to share some basic information about the Minnesota Public Facilities Authority and our programs for publicly funded water infrastructure. And I encourage everyone to check out our website, which is listed on the slide there. And you can go to that website and find additional information about our funding programs, the resources we have, including prior webinars that have been done by the Environmental Finance Center, staff contacts, a list of recently funded projects that we've done, give you an idea of some of the type of work that we do. But in a nutshell, the Public Facilities Authority is a state agency that provides financing to cities and other eligible recipients for wastewater and drinking water infrastructure projects through a variety of programs, through several different loan and grant programs. We provide funding for all types of municipal water infrastructure improvements, including replacement of aging infrastructure and treatment upgrades. And our funding is all about the capital items, not operational or organizational costs. It's the capital costs of upgrading, replacing those infrastructure components. PFA through the years has funded a number of regionalization and consolidation projects on both the water, drinking water, and the sanitary sewer side. And Aaron did mention that the Joint Power Board does have some authority to issue debt, but it can't be backed or pledged by the full faith and credit of the municipalities. And our loan programs do require that pledge. So our borrowers on our big drinking water and wastewater loan programs have to be an entity that has the authority to issue general obligation debt. So a Joint Powers Board couldn't be a borrower for our program, but they could be a part of a project as a partner with a community, and somebody else who has the authority could issue that debt. The PFA programs are designed to work together in a coordinated funding framework with low interest loans that are broadly available to cities of all sizes in all corners of the state, and supplemental grant programs that are targeted to specific projects based on affordability and to upgrade treatment plants to meet more stringent permit requirements. We don't do this alone at the Public Facilities Authority. We work in partnership with the Minnesota Department of Health and the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency to manage different aspects of our funding program. And each of these agencies has different roles in managing the programs. We follow an annual cycle with dates and deadlines year after year to develop our project list. One is called the project priority list, and another is the annual intended use plan. Our project priority list identifies projects and their ranking. It's a 5-year list, and it's managed and put together by the Minnesota Department of Health for drinking water projects and the Pollution Control Agency for wastewater and stormwater projects. The intended use plan is a list that the Public Facility Authority manages and puts together, and it's an annual list of those projects that are seeking funding through our loan programs. So all of the programs, all of the PFA water infrastructure programs follow the priority list. And that's something, if you take anything away from my brief talk here, is that the project priority lists are going to govern access to our programs. And those project priority lists rank projects based on age and condition and water quality and public health criteria. So some projects are going to be higher ranked than others depending upon what the situation is. We do coordinate our funding with other state and federal funding partners and even within our own programs. We work a lot with the USDA Rural Development, the Small Cities Development Program, when there is funding through the Corps of Engineers, anyone we can bring to further improve infrastructure in Minnesota, we're willing to try and partner with. So in closing, I just want to encourage you to go to the website, contact your PFA loan officer, reach out, talk to us about if you've got a prospective project, you don't know which way to go. We'll provide you with guidance and help you walk through our process, and hopefully we'll be able to work with you on your funding program. Thanks.
Thank you, Becky. We appreciate that overview, and we appreciate your time today. So now we'll kind of transition. Transition into some of the workforce kind of development side of things. And again, my name is Stephen Lapp, and I'm an acting project director at the EFC at UNC Chapel Hill. And so now we'll kind of transition here. So to kind of frame the conversation, we want to talk about some highlights from the Brookings Institute's Renewing the Water Workforce. So as the US economy continues to grow, many communities are struggling to translate economic growth into more equitable and inclusive employment opportunities. Simultaneously, many of the nation's water infrastructure assets are in urgent need of repair, maintenance, and restoration. Yet the workers capable of carrying out these efforts are in short supply due to an aging workforce. They might be eligible for retirement, and we might lack the pipeline for new talent. So we have a link here if you want to dig in more on some of the report, but we'll touch on some highlights coming up right here. So some of the good things about the water industry are, water occupations not only tend to pay more on average compared to all occupations nationally, but they also pay up to 50% more to workers at lower ends of the income scale. So you can see in this graph pulled from the report that was using statistics from the Bureau of Labor Statistics Employment, you can see on the x-axis the wage percentile, with on the y-axis that hourly wage. So in the turquoise kind of tealish blue bars, you have water occupations, and then the gray bars are the all other occupations. So you can see here, in many cases, water occupations are paying more comparatively, which can be a good attractor when talking about the benefits of working in the water world. On the other hand, what are some things that could be worked on as we go forward in developing the water workforce? So the report found that water workers tend to be older, lack gender and racial diversity in certain occupations. In 2016, it found nearly 85% of them were male, 2/3 were white, pointing to the need for a younger, more diverse talent. So this can really be an opportunity as we're going forward to be able to expand the types of people and the outreach potential to a broader audience. So you can see here in this graph on the x-axis again, we have the kind of age buckets of workers, with the y-axis being the share of the employment in percent. So again, the water occupants are going to be in that blue turquoise-ish bar, and you can see in some of the younger age buckets, it might be about even, or all other occupations may be a bit greater. But as you get to the 35 and up to the 65 plus, not quite the 65, so 35 to 64 buckets, you can see that the water occupations tend to have a higher share of employment. So again, this is just to kind of frame the conversation and can be an opportunity for us going forward as we develop our workforce. So what are your most valuable assets as a system? You could argue that that's the people. You need the right people with the right skills and the correct roles, and that takes some management. So we're going to talk today about how to think about thinking about people in the right roles with the right skills, and how to manage those people and develop a plan for managing the people. So it's no secret that employees leave. They always do. In preparation for that day is succession planning, which is the systematic approach to building replacement workers to ensure continuity by identifying potential successors in critical work processes. So the funny thing about people is that they don't last forever. They don't have a repair and replacement schedule, and they can be completely unpredictable. People leave for all sorts of reasons, and often, it can be unexpected, and it always tends to happen in the worst time. So it's best to be prepared as best as possible. It's not going to be perfect, but having a plan in place is better than nothing, and better to work off something. So to develop a succession plan, we kind of have a bit of a flexible process here, which can start with identifying positions. So which jobs are likely to experience vacancies in the next 5 years? Are there key leaders that need to be replaced within an organization? Is there specialized technical knowledge in these positions? Are there special licenses or special skills in these positions? And then the next one, identifying KSAs. So that stands for knowledge, skills, and abilities. So it's important here to think about, more than just the skills or abilities of an operator, but also the technical, mechanical, financial, managerial, or even data management skills that come with some of these positions that you've kind of identified as being, critical to operating your utility. And then we get into assessing people. Are there folks that are planning on retiring? What are your employees' hard and soft skills? Are you developing new leaders within the organization? So maybe some folks are thinking about retiring, but they haven't thought about who's going to be the next leader, who's going to be the next them. So what is the average age and tenure of your current employees? So have you thought about, maybe people are starting to get to retirement age, or they've been here about as long as, we normally expect folks. So kind of think about that. And then based off of those things, you can start to develop a plan. So how do you get knowledge, skills, and abilities from, either current employees or from new employees into these positions if those identified positions or identified skills were to leave the organization? So we have some tools on, how to continue to think about these kind of coming up in the slides. But it's important in that next bubble after develop plan to monitor the plan. It's important to realize that this is an ever-changing and flexible way of thinking, and that this, you might have an unexpected issue arise with an employee that may, change the skills or positions that you've identified. You may just need to come back to the drawing board and come back to one of those earlier circles. That's why we kind of have the continuing arrows going. So you can see here a human capital criticality matrix. So, this, we'll kind of explain this more, but the x-axis is the probability of vacancy. So how likely is someone going to leave, or how likely is a position going to be vacant? With the y-axis looking at the organizational impact. So if someone were to leave, how does it going to affect the organization? So, if the skill set, expertise, if a license that comes with a certain person is suddenly unavailable, how are we going to be able to function? Are we going to be able to, have maybe just a small bump and continue on going, or is something more significant going to happen? So, if you had maybe a newer employee that is going to be around for a bit, the probability of them in that position being vacant might be lower. And maybe there are some other employees that can kind of fill that role already. So there's some redundancy, maybe that is lower as well. You would have a low risk, but perhaps that position there aren't any redundancies, and it would be a great impact if that person were to not be in that position. Then you might move on over to that medium risk side. And then perhaps you have a really, a pillar of your organization that is the Jack or Jill of all trades, and is really good at what they do. And maybe they're getting closer to retiring. So that probability of them leaving might be a bit higher, and the impact of them leaving would be a lot higher as well. So then you kind of move on over to that higher risk category. So it might not be something that's readily apparent. Maybe it's someone who does some of the payroll or the IT work, or even something smaller as a pesticide applicator license. But it's important to think about all the big and small things that people do, and to think through the impact of someone leaving. So a succession plan process can take the form of gap analysis. So it's essentially, where are you at today? So just trying to describe your current state, and then describe the desired state that you'd like your organization to be at, and comparing the two to deduce what might be missing. And that's essentially the gap. So you then, based on that gap, you can assemble a plan to address that. So let's talk a little bit more about how we might do that. So the first step to analyze our workforce gaps as of today, with no one leaving, is to kind of list, all the staff that provide work to keep the system running, identify which knowledge, skills, and abilities come with each job, and divide, those into maybe technical, personal, characteristics or soft skills as a way to kind of just organize your thoughts and organize how you're thinking about the folks in your organization. So we'll start with that left box, the workforce demand desired state. And here we're going to want to list all the people, not necessarily individuals, but the positions required to run a system. It looks like I may have lost. There we go. Sorry about that. So we're going to want to list out the positions, not necessarily just the people, and the knowledge, skills, and abilities that come with those positions to run a system. What certifications are required for those positions, and who needs to be where for the desired state of your workforce. And then that middle box, the workforce supply current state, you want to go through and list what you have, positions that are currently filled, the knowledge, skills, and abilities that you already have, the certifications that you have already with certain people, who is in which position, etc. And then on that right hand box, this is essentially, again, what the gap is. So what's missing? It could be a single position. You could have all positions filled perhaps, but you might be missing a certification or a certain skill to really fully successfully be able to operate your utility. So, how do you fill that gap? Maybe it's through training, maybe it's through professional development to kind of bring on that skill within your existing workforce. So you can kind of play with the formula a little bit. You can kind of remove one person to see what knowledge, skills, and abilities, certifications, etc., leave with that person. And so depending on your system, what you have, and who you have, this tool can be used to think about professional development, reorganization, hiring, etc. So it can be a good way to kind of identify where you're at and where you need to go. So some common pitfalls as you're developing these plans and thinking about the longevity of your organization are some of the things that we've seen happen, and we want to highlight some of them here. The first is keeping it a secret. We want transparency in the organization. We want everyone to feel like they are on board with the process. We want everyone to feel like they understand what's going on and that there's not some sort of reorganization or shifting around to make people feel uncomfortable. If people feel like the leadership is transparent and they have more buy-in with the organization, they're going to feel more comfortable in their positions. Underestimating the talent within the organization. Perhaps you need to hire for some positions and or for some skills, not necessarily maybe a position. And there's some current staff on hand that want to expand their capacity and have a drive to maybe pick up some of those skills and fill some of those holes to expand their role within the organization. So we don't want to underestimate the folks that we have available to us already before we go out and try to expand our workforce. Another one is focusing exclusively on hard skills. So as you're kind of identifying, maybe what you need in your organization, maybe you're thinking about a certain, grade of operator or certain certificates or license or, certain skills that they might need to have, whether it's, financial skills or data management skills. But there's a lot of soft skills that really kind of drive a lot of the day-to-day operations and in terms of leadership and management and effective communication, and realizing that those are also skills to incorporate in your plan is important as well. And then this kind of fits into a little bit of what I've said already, but not offering training or development opportunities. So, we know that, employees that feel like their employers are investing into them are going to be a lot happier in their positions. They're going to want to stay in their organization a lot longer. And that can be a good way to, again, expand an existing employee's capacity within the organization to kind of get some redundancies in certain skills, or to fill certain holes instead of hiring for a new employee. And then sometimes another pitfall, we expect sometimes employees to self-identify that they might want to expand their capacity or do something, but it can also be on the leadership to, help people see that they have a good base to maybe fill that hole. It should be on, really effective leaders should be able to see who is going to replace them in the future, who has the skill sets to be the next them, so we want to make sure that we're encouraging employees. We want to be able to hold the leadership accountable for succession planning. If we've identified this as something that we need to do, we want to make sure that we're sticking to that plan. And so these are just some that we want to highlight today. So, recruitment, we've kind of identified, maybe some ways to think about succession planning, but, how do we drum up some interest for water careers? How do we get new people into the business? So let's take a look about how we might do that. So to create some interest in water careers, it might, take some reframing of some of the benefits of working in the water industry. So we'll talk some about these benefits, and I'm sure you all know some of these things to be true, but perhaps an outsider may not have realized that this could be a benefit of working in the water career. And these are some of the things that we've seen when talking to utilities that have come up about why they like working in the water industry. So environmental stewardship, high-tech nature of the industry, public service. We see public service come up quite a bit. People like feeling that they are giving back to their community, that they are helping their community provide an environmental service and water services to their neighbors and to their community members. And so that can be kind of pull on the drive of someone to want to join the water industry. Personal benefits, stable employment. We know that people are always going to need water, and people are always going to need safe water and proper wastewater treatment. So definitely will be around for a while. And the quality of life that comes with the water careers. So some recruitment kind of ideas, some pools for outreach could include K through 12, grades, post-secondary, veterans, mid-career professionals. So you could offer, we've seen some success when utilities have offered, field trips or had, little camps or little kind of science exhibits to help people just understand what the water world looks a little bit more like, or they've developed internships to kind of get people on the ground experience working and seeing more about what the day-to-day work is like. And also, being a part of career fairs can help people think about the water industry in a new way. We've seen partnering with veteran kind of job placement programs be successful. A lot of veterans are used to a schedule, perhaps used to being, up early and on the job and doing hands-on tasks. And this can be a good placement as well. In addition, another way to recruit folks is to have an employee referral program. Incentivizing your current employees to find the next hire can be a good way to find, good quality hires, and studies show that employee referral programs leads to good quality hires, as well as social media. So are you using perhaps Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter or however you normally engage with your community, or how your community engages with other organizations? Are you using those avenues to kind of push out these employment opportunities, or to just drum up interest in the water industry as well, so that there already is an interest when you go to put out a hire? So where to find good employees? We have some ideas here on the left hand side. You can kind of see some more generalized kind of job listing websites. With on the right, you get a little more personal, maybe some local paper or flyers that you send out with your bill, or other flyers that you send out with normal information about your utility on your website, word of mouth, trade organizations and trade schools. And your first step is to make sure that you have an effective job description for each position in your company. Your job description should reflect careful thought as to the roles the individual will fill, the skill sets they need, the personality attributes that are important to completing the tasks for that position, any relevant experience that would differentiate one applicant from another. And this might sound fairly basic, but you'd be surprised at how many companies fail to really develop or update job descriptions. And we want to make sure that it aligns with your brand and the benefits that we highlighted earlier. Maybe use this new reframing of the message about why someone would want to work in the water career, and kind of tie that into the to the description to create a targeted, meaningful, attractive message through your kind of job advertisement. So these are just some ideas about thinking through workforce planning and development and recruitment. And again, if you have questions on these things, we're happy to talk about them now or later. So we do have on our Environmental Finance Center Network website, you can see that there's an assistance tab at the top. And if you would like to request assistance, you can kind of fill out that form and kind of give your contact information, what kind of assistance that you're looking for. That could be in the context of the content that we talked about today, with partnerships and regionalization or workforce planning, but it could also extend to some other topics like rates, finances, affordability, asset management, and we'll kind of get you to the right contact person. And I believe we have a poll to see if you would like assistance, so we can reach out directly to you in the meantime. So take a little bit to answer that poll, and if you say yes, we'll reach out to you one-on-one. If you say no, that's again perfectly fine, and maybe you change your mind down the line, and there's always our website, or you can reach out to us directly. So I think we closed the poll. So, oh.
Hi, Stephen. There are a couple questions for you. And we do have at least 5 minutes, so folks on the line, please go ahead and submit any other questions that you may have. We also would love it if everybody that attended today could complete our evaluation, which I'm going to share in the chat right now. So if you have a minute and would like to give us some feedback, please do. There will also be a link to that form in the follow-up email that you will all automatically receive from GoToWebinar. So first, quick question about partnership. What do you all see as common hindrances to partnerships and regionalization, and how do you advise people moving past them? Additionally, are there less formal ways people can start these relationships?
Sure, I'll take that. Thank you, Tess. So, I think the biggest inhibitor is often public perception of the partnership. And like I mentioned, that sort of concern about a loss of autonomy associated with regionalizing or consolidating. It's really hard for us sometimes we work with systems and we go in and the pumps and pipes and all those pieces can be figured out pretty easily. And sometimes even the financial pieces are pretty straightforward and much better, but the political dynamic between systems can be really challenging, and there's just a resistance to want to partner with certain systems around them. So that's a big challenge that we see. I think it's important to have open conversations, and again, some of the resource guides that we've put together can help at least facilitate those conversations. But starting off by just recognizing what kind of opportunities are there on a small scale to regionalize with systems around you, and identifying what kind of challenges are you both facing, and how could we talk about those challenges together and see if we can at least start sharing from communication standpoint or resource standpoint. Some of the programs Becky mentioned, how have you been able to get certain funding sources, or how has that worked for you? And those original conversations are going to be really useful in building the relationship with a system that you might later realize you need to partner with in a more elaborate or integrated way. So that's what I would recommend, and again, just kind of helping to keep the positive perception of partnering in general.
Yeah, thank you. And a quick follow-up, and maybe Becky can help here, but what kinds of partnerships are common in Minnesota that are helpful for receiving funding from some of the capital investment projects, and what types of partnerships do you often see successful?
Well, I think, as I mentioned before, our loan programs require someone to issue a general obligation note to us, but we have seen some communities, maybe they're side by side and one already provides the water to the other. So part of it is just sometimes one community being a leader and taking on the kind of the financial obligation, kind of coordinating that, but the financial costs are shared between the members or participating members, like of the Joint Powers Board or someone who isn't authorized to sell GO debt to us. So, and I think part of it, it's got to make sense. There has to be good written agreements that outline who's doing what and who's paying for costs and how things are managed. I think that's a big part too. You can't just leave it to a handshake. Things have to be thought out and worked out and agreed to.
Great. And I think we have time for maybe just one more question. So this one is for Stephen. Can you speak a bit about how COVID has impacted the workforce for utilities?
Yeah, definitely. We have seen that, for some folks that they've had to perhaps cut some staff, or even just have shifts be spread apart to keep some people more distanced, as well as we've also seen this be an opportunity to kind of develop the existing employees. Sometimes it can be hard to hire during COVID. Maybe people don't want to move to a new part of a town or just from a different town. And so we've seen folks have some success training kind of in-house to kind of, fill the proper needs that they have in the meantime, which is good going forward, because then you have more flexibility and are more resilient with more people having more types of skills. So we've definitely seen that, and that's been a positive for a lot of utilities.
Great. Well, we are right at the top of the hour. So at this time, I'd like to hand it back off to you and Aaron just to make any closing comments.
Yeah, thank you, Tess. So thank you all for joining us today, and you can see our contact information here, and feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions about the topics of today, or some of the other areas of expertise that Tess discussed at the beginning of slides. But thank you all for joining us. Aaron?
Yeah, thank you. It was wonderful to be here. And thank you, Becky, for participating. And I think this will be made, the recording of this will be made available on the website at the state. So if you want to share it with any other utilities that weren't able to participate that you think might be interested, please do.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.